On the morning of our company's 10th anniversary, exactly 3 hours before the celebration banquet was supposed to begin, my husband handed me a folder with 47 signatures inside it and calmly said, I no longer owned my own company. The room smelled like fresh lilies and printer ink when he told me. If you've ever had someone dismantle your life using nothing but paperwork and a quiet voice, you already know how cold that moment feels. Before I continue, let me ask you something. If the person you trusted most in the world handed you proof that they'd been planning to erase you for months, would you scream or would you stay perfectly calm? Because I did something most people still don't believe. I smiled. And if you believe revenge doesn't have to be loud to be devastating, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read every single one. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was 32 years old that day, and I had built Carter Analytics from a one-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas, into a company valued at $18.6 million. At least, that's what I thought. The anniversary banquet was supposed to be the biggest night of my career. We had booked the ballroom at the Driscoll Hotel, ordered custom glass awards, and invited more than 200 clients, investors, and city officials. My speech had been printed on thick ivory paper and tucked into my purse. I never got to give it. Daniel Carter, my husband of 6 years, and the company's CFO, stood across from me in my own office, wearing the navy suit I'd bought him for our last anniversary. His expression was calm, too calm. Next to him stood Melissa Grant, my executive assistant for the past 3 years. She didn't look at me. That should have been the first clue that something was wrong. Daniel placed the folder on my desk and slid it toward me like he was presenting quarterly numbers. You should read it, he said quietly. I opened it. Stock transfer agreements, voting rights documents, board authorization signatures. Every single page was dated within the last 9 months. Every single one was legally valid. And every single one proved the same thing. I no longer held controlling interest in Carter Analytics. I owned just 14% of the company. Daniel owned 36%. And Melissa, my assistant, who scheduled my meetings, fetched my coffee, and knew exactly how I took my tea, owned 22%. Together, they controlled the company. Together, they could legally vote me out, which they already had. My name was no longer listed as CEO. I read the pages twice before I spoke. How I asked, just one word. Daniel exhaled slowly, as if relieved we had finally reached this moment. You signed most of it yourself, Evelyn, he said. That sentence didn't make sense at first. Then he pointed to the signatures. My signature. Every page had it. Perfectly authentic. Not forged, not altered. My handwriting. My name. Signed in blue ink. My chest felt tight, but my voice stayed steady. I don't remember approving any of this. Melissa finally spoke. Then her voice soft and professional. The same tone she used when confirming my appointments. They were included in routine board packets, she said. You trusted us to handle administrative matters. Routine packets. That phrase hit me like ice water. For years, I'd signed stacks of documents. Every month vendor contracts, compliance forms, minor shareholder updates. It was standard practice for fast-growing companies. I trusted Daniel to review financial documents. I trusted Melissa to organize them. I trusted both of them. And trust, as it turns out, can be weaponized very quietly. Daniel rested his hands on the back of the chair across from me. This isn't personal, he said. It was the kind of sentence people say when something is extremely personal. The board believes the company needs different leadership moving forward. The board. I flipped through the pages again. Board members, all 5 of them, had voted unanimously. 3 of those 5 had been Daniel's hires over the past year. The realization settled slowly in my chest. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't impulsive. This had been planned, carefully, patiently. For months, possibly years. Melissa slid another document across the desk, a formal termination notice, effective immediately. My access to company systems had already been revoked. My office keycard would stop working at noon. Security would escort me out if I refused to leave. All of it legal, all of it airtight, all of it done without a single raised voice. I leaned back in my chair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I studied their faces. Daniel looked relieved. Melissa looked nervous. That was interesting, because if she had truly won, she shouldn't have looked afraid. I closed the folder. Then I did something neither of them expected. I laughed, not loudly, just once. A small, quiet breath of sound. Daniel frowned. "You're taking this better than I expected," he said. I met his eyes. "You think this is over?" I said calmly. Melissa's fingers tightened around her tablet. Daniel shook his head slightly. "It is over, Evelyn." He leaned closer. "You're out." The room went very still, and that's when I noticed something strange. At the very back of the final document stack, there was a thin, yellow tab sticking out, one that didn't match any of the others. Melissa noticed me looking at it. For the first time since entering the room, her composure cracked. Just slightly, but enough. Enough to tell me one critical thing. There was something in that folder they did not want me to read. I slid the tabbed page out slowly, and when I saw the date printed at the top, my heartbeat changed. Because it was dated 11 months ago, 2 months before any of the stock transfers had begun. And it wasn't a transfer agreement. It was something else entirely, something that explained why Melissa looked afraid, and why Daniel hadn't realized yet that they had made a very expensive mistake. The date at the top of that document was from last February, 11 months before the morning my husband calmly removed me from my own company, and the number printed in bold at the center of the page was $2,750,000. That number was not part of any stock transfer. It wasn't a valuation adjustment, and it definitely wasn't something I had ever approved. Before I tell you what it was, let me ask you something. Have you ever signed something quickly trusting someone else had already reviewed it, only to realize later that trust can cost millions? Because that moment staring at that number was the exact second I understood this wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. If you believe trust should never be given blindly, go ahead and tap like and tell me in the comments if you've ever been betrayed by someone you worked with. I slid the page out completely, keeping my face neutral. The document wasn't a stock transfer. It was a private loan agreement, a secured business loan, issued under Carter Analytics' corporate credit line. Borrower, Grant Consulting, LLC. My stomach tightened when I saw the name. Melissa Grant. Her full legal name appeared beneath it. Melissa Ann Grant. And below that, her personal social security number, partially masked, but still clearly hers. I read the next line slowly. Collateral 8% equity shares in Carter Analytics. I didn't react outwardly, but inside, everything sharpened. Because I had never approved a corporate loan to an employee. Never. Not once. Our bylaws required 2 executive signatures for any loan exceeding $250,000. This loan was nearly 11 times that limit, and it had been approved under my name. My signature appeared at the bottom, perfectly identical to the others, but something about it felt wrong. Not forged, not exactly, just slightly off. I flipped to the final page. Default clause: if borrower failed repayment within 18 months, equity collateral would automatically transfer to the company's controlling shareholder. Not the company itself, the controlling shareholder. My eyes lifted slowly. Daniel, he shifted his weight slightly when he noticed me reading more carefully. Melissa swallowed. That document is unrelated, Daniel said quickly. Unrelated. That word told me everything. Because if it truly meant nothing, he wouldn't have spoken at all. I placed the paper neatly on top of the stack. So I said, calmly, my assistant borrowed $2.75 million from my company using my signature. Neither of them spoke. I continued, and the collateral was company shares. That would transfer to the controlling shareholder if she defaulted. Daniel's jaw tightened. It was a strategic financing arrangement, he said. Strategic. I nodded slowly. Then, why didn't you mention it in any board reports? Melissa looked down at the floor. Daniel didn't answer immediately. That silence confirmed something critical. This loan was never disclosed properly, which meant one thing in corporate law: fraud risk, impossibly embezzlement. I leaned back in my chair again. You do realize, I said softly, that corporate lending requires recorded board approval. Daniel finally looked irritated. It was handled internally. Internally. Another dangerous word, because internal in financial compliance often translates to not documented properly. I tapped the page lightly. This says, repayment deadline is August this year, I said. That's 6 months from now. Melissa's breathing became shallow. Daniel crossed his arms. It won't be an issue, he said. That was the first lie he told. And it was so obvious, I almost felt embarrassed for him. Because if Melissa had already repaid the loan, he would have said so immediately. Instead, he avoided the answer, which meant she hadn't repaid it, which meant those shares, 8%, were still legally tied to this loan. And that meant something far more important. Their takeover wasn't fully secure. Not yet. Because a defaulted secured loan creates legal vulnerabilities, especially if approval procedures were violated. I closed the folder gently. Then I stood up. Melissa took a small step back instinctively. That movement told me more than words ever could. She wasn't confident. She was afraid. And fear usually means guilt. Daniel tried to regain control of the moment. You'll receive a formal severance package, he said. 3 months' salary. I almost smiled again. 3 months' salary after I built an $18 million company from scratch. But I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. Instead, I asked a question, a very simple one. Melissa, I said quietly, did you read the default clause before you signed this loan? Her head snapped up. Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected me to address her directly. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. Daniel answered for her. She understood the terms, but his voice was sharper now, defensive, which meant he wasn't as certain as he wanted me to believe. I watched Melissa carefully, because sometimes silence reveals more than any confession. And in that moment, her expression told me something crucial. She hadn't fully understood what she signed, which meant she trusted Daniel, exactly the way I once had. I picked up my purse. I'll leave, I said calmly. Daniel blinked surprised. No argument, no resistance, no emotional breakdown. That wasn't the reaction he expected, because most people, when their life collapses, react loudly. But revenge doesn't begin with noise. It begins with information. I walked toward the door. Just before I opened it, I paused. Then I said one sentence quietly, evenly. You should really check whether that loan was filed with the SEC disclosure requirements. Daniel froze. Melissa's face went pale. Because failure to disclose a material financial transaction in a privately held company seeking investment funding isn't just unethical. It can be illegal. I didn't wait for their response. I walked out of my office. The hallway lights felt too bright. Employees glanced up from their desks, confused. Some smiled. Some avoided eye contact. None of them knew yet that I had just been erased. At the elevator, I pressed the button. My phone vibrated in my hand. An email notification from the company's legal compliance system. Subject line: automated notice. Unresolved executive authorization flag. My pulse slowed, because that system only generated alerts when a document approval process was incomplete or improperly executed, which meant one thing: that loan agreement had not passed full authorization review. And someone inside the system still had access to the pending compliance record. Someone who hadn't closed it. Someone who might already know something was wrong. And the sender's name at the bottom of the email made my breath catch for just a second. Because it wasn't Daniel. And it definitely wasn't Melissa. It was someone neither of them had realized, still reported directly to me. At 11:18 that same morning, exactly 22 minutes after security escorted me out of my own building, I received a second email. And this one contained a single attachment labeled Authorization Chain Log Restricted. The file size was 3.2 megabytes, which meant it wasn't a simple form. It was a full audit trail. Before I opened it, let me ask you something. If you discovered that someone who betrayed you had left behind a digital footprint they didn't know existed, would you confront them immediately? Or would you stay silent and watch? Because what I did next determined everything that followed. If you believe silence can be more powerful than confrontation, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments what you would have done in that moment. I didn't open the attachment right away. Instead, I looked at the sender's name again. Nathaniel Brooks, full name Nathaniel Thomas Brooks. Our internal compliance director, 46 years old, former SEC investigator, and one of the very few people in the company who answered only to me. Not to Daniel, not to the board, only to me. That reporting structure had been my decision 3 years earlier. Daniel had argued against it at the time, saying it was unnecessary bureaucracy. I had insisted. Because when you run a data analytics firm handling multi-million-dollar contracts, compliance oversight isn't optional. It's survival. And now standing at the parking lot, outside the building that used to be mine, I realized something very important. Nathaniel had not been included in Daniel's plan, which meant Daniel didn't fully control everything yet. That was their first mistake. I opened the attachment. The document wasn't just an audit trail. It was a complete authorization history, time-stamped, digitally verified, and impossible to alter without leaving evidence. I scrolled to the section for the $2.75 million loan, and there it was. Every step recorded. Initiation request, Melissa Grant. Submission, date February 14th, 11 months ago. Approval sequence required. Chief Executive Officer signature. Chief Financial Officer verification. Compliance Director authorization. 3 steps. But the log showed something different. CEO signature recorded at 7:42 p.m. February 14th. CFO verification recorded at 7:45 p.m. Compliance authorization blank. Pending. Not approved. Never completed. Which meant the loan had never been legally finalized under corporate governance rules. My heartbeat steadied, because this changed everything. Without compliance authorization, the loan existed in a legal gray zone. It could be challenged, possibly invalidated. And if the loan were invalid, the collateral agreement tied to those shares could also collapse, meaning Melissa's 8% stake might not legally belong to her or to Daniel. I kept scrolling, and that's when I saw the next detail. The IP address used to submit my signature. It wasn't from my office. It wasn't from my home. It wasn't from any device registered to me. It came from an internal admin terminal located in the executive floor conference room. Timestamp 7:42 p.m. That date hit me immediately. February 14th, Valentine's Day. I remembered exactly where I had been that evening. At a charity gala in Dallas. Daniel had attended with me. We'd left the office at 4 p.m. that day, which meant there was no possible way I had physically signed anything at 7:42 p.m. My signature had been captured digitally, copied from stored records, and applied without my presence. Legally, that wasn't just unethical. It could qualify as corporate fraud. I leaned against my car, breathing slowly. A cold clarity settled over me. Daniel hadn't simply outmaneuvered me. He had crossed a legal line, and people who cross legal lines leave evidence. Always. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was a text message. Unknown number. Just one sentence. Check page 18. I didn't need to ask who sent it. I opened the audit file again and scrolled. Page 18 contained the activity log for CFO verification. Daniel Step. Verification recorded at 7:45 p.m. 3 minutes after my supposed signature. But beneath the timestamp was a detail he clearly hadn't noticed. Biometric login method, fingerprint scan, device ID CFO workstation, which meant Daniel had personally logged into the system, using his own fingerprint to verify a document that still lacked compliance approval. That single act connected him directly to the incomplete authorization chain. And in corporate investigations, incomplete chains are dangerous because they create liability, especially when financial transactions exceed regulatory thresholds. I closed the file slowly. Then I noticed something else. At the very bottom of page 18, in small gray text, there was a system note, auto-generated. Most people would never notice it, but Nathaniel would have, and now so did I. Flagged for escalation review. Unauthorized executive approval sequence detected. Escalation review. That meant the system had automatically alerted the compliance director, Nathaniel, 11 months ago, which meant he had known about this irregularity for almost a year. Yet he had never reported it publicly. Why? I looked back at the email he'd sent me. No message, no explanation, just the file and a timestamp showing it had been sent precisely 8 minutes after my termination notice was processed. That timing wasn't random. It was deliberate. He had waited until I was officially removed, which meant he had been watching, waiting, monitoring for something. The question was what? My phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. Meet me at 3 p.m. You deserve to know everything. No location, no signature, just that sentence. I stared at the screen because suddenly I understood something chilling. Nathaniel hadn't just discovered irregularities. He had been documenting them, quietly, for months, possibly building a case, not just against Melissa, not just against Daniel, but against something much larger. And if that was true, then my removal from the company might not have been the end of the story. It might have been the trigger, because people don't wait 11 months to act, unless they're preparing to expose something far bigger than a stolen company. At exactly 2:57 p.m. that afternoon, 3 hours and 39 minutes after my husband removed me from my own company, I walked into a nearly empty cafe 2 blocks from the courthouse. And the first thing Nathaniel Brooks said to me was, "Your company wasn't their real target." He didn't even ask how I was. He didn't say hello. He didn't offer sympathy. Just that one sentence and the number that followed it. They've moved over $6.4 million through shell accounts in the last 9 months. Before we go further, let me ask you something. If you discovered that someone you trusted wasn't just betraying you, but using your life's work as a cover for something much bigger, would you still want revenge? Or would you want justice? Because what I learned in that cafe changed the direction of everything. If you believe revenge is only powerful when it's backed by truth, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments which you'd choose, revenge or justice. Nathaniel sat across from me, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He looked exactly as he always had in the office, precise, controlled, almost painfully calm. But there was something different in his eyes now. Urgency. I sat down slowly. "You knew," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. He nodded once. For 11 months. That confirmation didn't shock me. The audit log had already told me that. What mattered was why he hadn't acted sooner. "You could have stopped it," I said. "No," he replied immediately. "I could only document it." That distinction mattered. Because in corporate compliance, suspicion isn't enough. You need proof, and proof takes time. Nathaniel slid a thin, black folder across the table. "This started as a standard irregularity review," he said. "One incomplete authorization chain. Normally, that's administrative." I opened the folder. Inside were transaction summaries, account transfers, dates, amounts. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands, then millions, all routed through vendor accounts, consulting fees, data acquisition contracts, every payment technically legitimate on paper. But something about them felt wrong. I looked up. These are company expenses. Nathaniel nodded. Yes. Then he added quietly, none of the vendors exist. The air felt colder suddenly. I looked back at the documents. Shell companies, fake addresses, registered in Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming. All legal states for anonymous corporate registrations, which meant tracing ownership would be extremely difficult. But not impossible. How long, I asked. He answered immediately. 9 months, starting 2 weeks after Melissa's loan was initiated. That timeline wasn't random. It meant the loan had been step 1, a financial foothold, a way to insert Melissa into the ownership structure. And once she was inside, they could authorize transactions more easily. My voice remained steady. You're saying they used Carter Analytics to launder money? Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Yes, the word landed heavily between us. Laundering. That wasn't corporate betrayal. That was federal crime. Serious federal crime. I flipped to the final page in the folder. There was a chart, a simple flow diagram. Company accounts leading to shell vendors. Then from those vendors, funds moved again into a single destination account. One entity, named Meridian Strategic Holdings. I frowned. That's not ours. Nathaniel shook his head. No. He paused, then said something that made my stomach drop. It belongs to your husband. For a moment, I said nothing. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too well. Daniel hadn't just pushed me out. He had been using my company to secretly build his own. And he hadn't done it alone. I thought of Melissa, her nervous hands, her pale face when I mentioned SEC disclosure. She wasn't the mastermind. She was the entry point. Nathaniel continued quietly. He couldn't access funds alone. He needed a second executive shareholder to authorize high-value transfers. Melissa, of course. Her 22% stake made her the perfect accomplice. Or pawn, possibly both. I leaned back slowly. When were you planning to report this? Nathaniel held my gaze. Next week. Why next week? Because I needed one final piece of evidence. My pulse tightened. What piece? He opened another document. This one was different. A calendar schedule, highlighted in red. Company anniversary banquet. Tonight. He tapped the date. Public disclosure event. I stared at him. You were going to expose them tonight. He nodded. In front of investors, clients, and the board. The plan was bold and risky because public exposure triggers immediate legal consequences. Stock freezes, regulatory investigations, asset holds, which meant if Nathaniel revealed everything tonight, Daniel's entire financial network could collapse within hours. I looked at him carefully. Then why tell me now? His answer came without hesitation. Because they removed you this morning. He leaned forward slightly. And once you're out, you lose legal standing to initiate internal investigations. That reality hit hard. Without executive authority, I couldn't act directly, but I could still testify. I could still provide evidence. And I could still do something else. Something Daniel had not considered. Something far more dangerous than a corporate investigation. I asked quietly, do they know, you know? Nathaniel shook his head. No. Are you sure? He hesitated, just for a second. That hesitation told me the truth. He wasn't completely certain, which meant something had changed, something recent, something that had forced him to move earlier than planned. I noticed his phone on the table. The screen lit briefly. A message notification appeared. Just a preview, but enough for me to read 3 words before it disappeared. Meeting moved up. Nathaniel saw me notice. His expression tightened. Then he said quietly, they're not waiting until tonight anymore. My heartbeat slowed, because that meant Daniel was accelerating something. A final step. A move that would lock everything in place before exposure could happen. I looked at Nathaniel. What are they planning? He held my gaze, then answered in a voice so calm, it felt almost chilling. They're finalizing the sale of the company. I froze. Sale? He nodded. To Meridian Strategic Holdings, my husband's secret company, the one funded with money stolen from mine. And the closing time for that transaction was scheduled for 6 p.m., 3 hours from now, which meant if they completed that sale, Carter Analytics would legally cease to be mine forever, and the money trail would become much harder to recover. Nathaniel closed the folder, then said the one sentence that made everything crystal clear. "If we don't stop them before 6 p.m., they win." At 3:21 p.m., exactly 2 hours and 39 minutes before my husband planned to finalize the sale of my company to his own secret holding firm, Nathaniel Brooks told me something that made my hands go completely still around my coffee cup. "The transfer can still be stopped," he said quietly, "but only by someone who legally retains executive override authority." There was a number printed in the corner of the document he slid toward me. One line, one clause: override, threshold 15% shareholder veto. And my ownership percentage? 14%, 1% short. Before we go further, let me ask you something. If someone stripped you of almost everything you built, but left you just enough power to fight back, would you risk everything to use it? Because in that moment, I realized Daniel hadn't completely erased me. He had underestimated something, and that mistake would become the most expensive one he ever made. If you believe the smallest advantage can change everything, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments, what would you do if you had just 1% more power than they thought? Nathaniel tapped the clause again. "The veto rule is built into your original corporate charter," he said. "You added it when the company was incorporated." I remembered that day vividly, 6 years ago, sitting in a law office with stacks of formation documents. My attorney had advised adding a minority shareholder protection clause, a safeguard to prevent hostile takeovers. At the time, Daniel had called it paranoid. Now it was the only thing standing between him and total control. "But I only have 14%, I said quietly. Nathaniel nodded. "Yes." Then he added, "Unless Melissa defaults." The words settled heavily between us, because suddenly everything connected. Melissa's loan, the collateral shares, the incomplete authorization chain. If her loan were declared invalid or in default before 6 p.m., those 8% shares could be frozen, possibly reverted. And if they were removed from Daniel's control block, his voting majority would collapse. I leaned forward slightly. "How fast can a default be triggered?" Nathaniel answered immediately. "If the loan is proven improperly authorized, the contract can be suspended pending investigation." "How long would that take?" He met my eyes. "Minutes. Not hours. Not days. Minutes." Because the compliance system still listed the loan as unresolved, which meant it hadn't been legally closed, which meant the shares tied to it weren't fully secured. Daniel thought they were safe. He thought everything was finalized. He had never noticed the incomplete authorization flag. Or if he had, he didn't understand its legal consequences. That arrogance would cost him. I asked quietly, "Why didn't you suspend the loan earlier?" Nathaniel's expression hardened slightly. "Because doing so would have alerted them." He paused. "And they would have accelerated the asset transfer sooner," which meant he had been waiting for the right moment. A moment when the stakes were highest, when exposure would cause maximum impact. And that moment was now. I looked down at the document again. 1%. That was all I needed. 1% to block the sale. 1% to keep Carter Analytics from being legally absorbed into Daniel's shell company. 1% to force a regulatory review. But that 1% depended entirely on Melissa, on whether she realized she was about to lose everything. I asked quietly, "Does she know she's about to default?" Nathaniel shook his head. "No." "Does she know the loan authorization was incomplete?" "No." "Does she know Daniel used her shares as leverage for the sale?" Nathaniel's silence answered that question, which meant one thing. Melissa believed she was a partner, but legally, she was expendable, and Daniel had likely planned to let her take the fall if the fraud were exposed. A disposable accomplice, a perfect scapegoat. I leaned back slowly, because in that moment, something became very clear. Melissa wasn't just afraid earlier, she was trapped. And people who feel trapped often make desperate decisions. I asked Nathaniel, "What happens if she learns the truth before 6 p.m.? His answer was immediate. She could withdraw her consent for share use, Would that stop the sale? Yes, completely. For now, that was enough. Because stopping the sale today would trigger investigations tomorrow. And once regulators started digging, the money trail would unravel quickly. I looked at the clock on the cafe wall. 3:34 p.m. 2 hours and 26 minutes left. Not much time, but enough. I asked one final question. Where is Melissa right now? Nathaniel checked his phone. In the company building, preparing documents for the sale closing. I stood up slowly, because the next move was obvious. I wasn't going to confront Daniel yet. That would come later. First, I needed to speak to the one person he believed he controlled completely. Melissa Grant, because if she realized she was being sacrificed, she might become the key witness that destroyed him. Nathaniel rose as well. I can trigger the compliance suspension once she withdraws consent, he said. I nodded. Then we don't have much time. We walked out of the cafe together. The late afternoon sun felt harsh against my eyes. The company building stood just 4 blocks away. The same building I had walked out of that morning under security escort. Now I was walking back toward it, not as an employee, not as a CEO, but as someone about to change the outcome of everything. Halfway down the street, my phone vibrated. A new email notification. Sender Daniel Carter. Subject line. Final notice, do not interfere. I opened it. Inside was a single sentence and an attachment. The sentence read, if you contact Melissa before 6 p.m., the authorities will receive evidence of your own financial misconduct. My breath slowed because Daniel had just played his next card, and the attachment he sent was a scanned document bearing my name, dated 2 years ago, showing an offshore account transfer, an account I had never opened, which meant one thing: he wasn't just trying to erase me. He had prepared a way to frame me, and if he released that document first, I wouldn't just lose my company. I could face criminal charges, which meant time wasn't my only enemy anymore. Trust was. At 4:02 p.m., exactly 1 hour and 58 minutes before the scheduled closing of the company sale, I stood across the street from my own office building, holding a document that showed a $980,000 offshore transfer under my name that I had never authorized. The account number ended in 4,472. The transfer date was 2 years ago, and the receiving bank was located in the Cayman Islands. Before we continue, let me ask you something. If someone tried to destroy your life, not just by taking what you built, but by planting evidence to make you look like the criminal, would you fight back immediately? Or would you wait for the perfect moment? Because in that moment, staring at that document on my phone, I understood something chilling. Daniel wasn't just protecting himself. He was preparing to bury me. If you believe the most dangerous betrayals come from the people closest to you, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments whether you think he crossed the line long ago or just today. I read the attachment carefully. The formatting looked official. Bank letterhead, transaction routing codes, a digital timestamp. But there was one detail that didn't fit: the authorization signature line. My signature was there, perfectly replicated. But just like the loan agreement earlier, something about it was slightly wrong. A subtle difference in the pressure pattern. Anyone else would never notice, but I signed documents every day for 6 years. I knew exactly how my name looked when I wrote it quickly. And this one had been copied from a static template, which meant it wasn't just falsified. It had been fabricated using internal company records. Daniel hadn't created this recently. He'd prepared it years ago. A contingency, an insurance policy, in case he ever needed to destroy me. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me calm, because now I understood something very important. He had never trusted me, not even when we were married. Nathaniel stood beside me, reading over my shoulder. "This is serious," he said quietly. I nodded. Yes. He studied the document carefully. Then his voice lowered. "But it's also sloppy." I looked at him. "Why?" He pointed to the routing code. "Because this account number format didn't exist 2 years ago." My pulse slowed. Are you sure? He nodded. International banking updated numbering standards last year. This code wouldn't have been valid at the time this transfer supposedly happened. That single detail changed everything, because it meant Daniel's fake evidence could be proven fraudulent, easily, by a forensic accountant, which meant his threat wasn't airtight. It was desperate, and desperation only appears when someone feels pressured. I asked quietly. Why send this now? Nathaniel answered without hesitation. Because he knows you're getting close. I looked up at the building across the street. The windows reflected the late afternoon sun. Somewhere inside, Melissa was preparing documents for the sale, unaware she was about to lose everything, unaware she was being used, unaware she might become the scapegoat. I took a slow breath. We don't show her this yet, I said. Nathaniel frowned slightly. Why not? Because fear makes people defensive. I paused, but truth makes them talk. He understood immediately, because if Melissa realized she had been betrayed first, she might choose self-preservation over loyalty. And in corporate investigations, insider testimony is more powerful than any document. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Daniel. Just 4 words this time. You should walk away. I stared at the screen, then typed a reply. Only 1 sentence. You should have known me better. I didn't send it. Not yet. Because timing mattered. Everything now depended on timing. I slipped the phone into my purse. We go in through the south entrance, I told Nathaniel. Security won't stop you. They might. I met his eyes calmly. But they can't stop a shareholder. He nodded. Because even with only 14% ownership, I still had limited legal rights. Access rights, inspection rights. And one of those rights included requesting a shareholder meeting on site. A technicality. But technicalities can stop multi-million-dollar transactions. We crossed the street together. Each step felt deliberate, controlled, cold. Inside the lobby, the receptionist froze when she saw me. Her eyes widened. Miss Carter. I held up a hand gently. I'm here in my capacity as a shareholder. Her voice faltered. I need to notify security. That's fine, I said calmly. Because I knew something she didn't. Security couldn't legally remove me without written authorization from the board. And the board was currently preparing for a sale closing, which meant no one was paying attention to the lobby. 2 minutes later, we were in the elevator. The silence inside felt heavy. Nathaniel spoke quietly. If Melissa refuses to cooperate, I finished his sentence. Then we trigger compliance suspension anyway. He nodded. But without her testimony, it will be harder. Harder, not impossible, because evidence already existed. But insider confirmation would make it devastating. The elevator doors opened. Executive floor. The hallway lights hummed softly. Everything looked exactly the same. As if nothing had changed. As if I still belonged there. At the end of the corridor, the conference room door was slightly open. Inside, I could see Melissa sitting alone at the long glass table. Stacks of documents spread in front of her. Her hands moved quickly, organizing papers, but her posture looked tense, rigid, like someone carrying a weight too heavy to admit. I stepped closer quietly. She didn't notice me at first. Not until my shadow crossed the table. She looked up, and the moment our eyes met, the color drained from her face. Her lips parted. Evelyn, her voice trembled. That single reaction confirmed everything. She was afraid, not of me, but of what she suspected. I already knew. I closed the door behind me, gently, then sat down across from her. Nathaniel remained standing near the wall, silent, watching. I folded my hands on the table and asked the one question that would determine everything that happened next. Melissa, I said quietly, did Daniel tell you what happens to you after the sale is finalized? Her eyes widened in confusion. After, what do you mean? That answer told me the truth instantly. He hadn't told her anything. Not about the loan, not about the liability, not about the investigation, which meant she had no idea that in less than 2 hours, she was about to become the perfect person for him to blame. At 4:27 p.m., exactly 93 minutes before the sale of my company was scheduled to close, Melissa Grant's hands began shaking so badly that she knocked over a stack of contracts, and the first words out of her mouth were, "He told me we were safe." The number of pages scattered across the glass table was 52, all prepared for final signatures, all meant to erase me permanently. Before I continue, let me ask you something. If you suddenly realized the person you trusted had been planning to sacrifice you all along, would you admit you were wrong, or would you keep protecting them anyway? Because what Melissa chose in the next few minutes determined whether Daniel would walk away wealthy or lose everything. If you've ever watched someone realize they were never truly part of the plan, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments, do you think people like Melissa deserve sympathy or consequences? Melissa stared at me, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting between me and Nathaniel. "What do you mean what happens to me?" she asked, her voice thin. I didn't answer immediately. Silence can be more powerful than any accusation. Instead, I slid one document across the table, the loan agreement, her name printed clearly at the top. Borrower, Melissa Ann Grant. Her eyes fell to the page. For a moment, she didn't react. Then she whispered, "That's just a financing document." Her voice sounded like she was repeating something she'd been told, not something she truly understood. I nodded slowly. Yes. Then I tapped the clause near the bottom. "Do you know what collateral transfer upon default means?" Her brow furrowed. I was told it just meant the shares were temporarily held. Temporarily held. That was exactly how Daniel would have explained it. A partial truth wrapped around a lie. I leaned forward slightly. "Melissa, that clause means if the loan is declared invalid or unpaid, your shares don't go back to you." Her eyes widened. "They transfer to the controlling shareholder." Her lips parted. She looked down at the document again, then back at me. "That's Daniel," she whispered. I didn't respond, because she had just said it herself. And people believe truths more deeply when they speak them aloud. Her breathing quickened. No, he said we'd own the company together." Nathaniel spoke quietly from behind her. "The compliance authorization for this loan was never completed." She froze. "What?" "It's legally unresolved," he continued calmly, "which means those shares are currently under investigation risk." Her hands trembled. That can't be right." But her voice had already lost certainty, because deep down, she knew she had never truly been in control. I reached into my purse slowly, then placed another document on the table. The transaction flow chart, the one showing the $6.4 million routed into Meridian Strategic Holdings. Her eyes scanned it. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then, her gaze locked onto the final line. Owner Daniel Carter, her face drained completely. "He told me this was our company," she whispered. That sentence landed heavily in the room. Because now, for the first time, Melissa wasn't defending him. She was questioning him. And that shift was critical, because people don't betray someone they still trust. I asked quietly, "Did he ever tell you what would happen if regulators investigated these transfers?" She shook her head slowly. "No." "Did he explain that you were the second executive authorization on most of these transactions?" Her eyes widened again. I just signed what he told me to." "Exactly. Just like I had once done." Trust can create the perfect accomplice, even when the accomplice doesn't fully understand what they're doing. I leaned back, then said the sentence that broke her completely. "If federal investigators trace these transactions, you will appear as the primary co-authorizing officer." Her breathing hitched. "What does that mean?" "It means," Nathaniel said calmly, "you would likely face the first charges." The room went silent, because now she understood. Daniel wasn't protecting her. He had positioned her as a shield, as a buffer, as the first person to fall if everything collapsed. Tears filled her eyes. "But he said he loved me." The words sounded almost childish. Fragile. I didn't comfort her, because this wasn't about sympathy. This was about truth, and truth isn't gentle. I asked quietly. Did he tell you he was preparing evidence to accuse me of financial crimes? Her head snapped up. What? I slid my phone across the table. The fake offshore transfer document displayed on the screen. Her eyes scanned it, then widened in horror. He showed me something like this last week. My pulse tightened. What did he say? Her voice trembled. He said if you tried to fight him, he'd expose you. The confirmation settled heavily between us, because now it was clear. Daniel's plan had 3 layers. Take the company, frame me, sacrifice Melissa if necessary, complete protection for himself. I folded my hands calmly. Melissa, I said quietly, you have 2 choices right now. She looked at me, tears streaming silently. Choice 1, you stay loyal to him. I paused, and when investigators come, you face the consequences alone. Her shoulders shook. Choice 2, you protect yourself. Her breathing slowed slightly. How? Nathaniel answered. By withdrawing your consent for your shares to be used in the sale. She stared at him. What would that do? It would stop the transaction immediately. Her eyes moved back to me. And Daniel, I met her gaze steadily. He would have to answer questions he can't avoid anymore. Silence filled the room again. Long, heavy. Then she asked the most honest question she could. If I do this, will you help me? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth mattered more than comfort. I can't erase what you've done, I said quietly, but I can make sure you're not destroyed for it. Her eyes closed briefly. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Then she nodded, slowly, deliberately. I'll withdraw consent. The words felt final, irreversible. Nathaniel immediately pulled out his tablet. Then we need to act now, he said, because the clock on the wall read 4:46 p.m., 74 minutes left before closing. Melissa reached for the consent withdrawal form. Her hand still trembled as she picked up the pen, but just as she lowered it to sign, the conference room door burst open. Daniel stood in the doorway. His expression wasn't surprised. It was cold, controlled, prepared, as if he had been expecting this moment. His eyes moved from me to Melissa, to the documents on the table. Then he said one quiet sentence that made the air feel suddenly sharp. You really should have left when I gave you the chance, Evelyn. At 4:49 p.m., exactly 71 minutes before the closing deadline, my husband stepped into the conference room, locked the door behind him, and calmly placed a folder on the table labeled Federal Referral Packet. There were 3 copies inside, each stamped with a time schedule set for automatic email delivery at 5:30 p.m. Before we continue, let me ask you something. If someone threatened to destroy your life with a single click, would you panic? Or would you look for the flaw they didn't realize they left behind? Because what Daniel did in that moment wasn't just intimidation. It was a gamble, and he didn't realize he was already losing. If you believe the most dangerous power is the illusion of control, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments, do you think people like Daniel actually believe they'll never get caught? Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He looked composed, too composed, which meant he believed he was still in control. He walked slowly toward the table. His gaze never left mine. You're interfering with a lawful transaction, he said quietly. His tone sounded almost tired, as if I were the inconvenience, not the woman whose company he'd stolen. Melissa's hand froze over the withdrawal form. Her face was pale. Daniel noticed immediately. His eyes softened when he looked at her, a calculated softness. Melissa, he said gently, you don't need to listen to this. His voice carried the same calm reassurance he'd likely used for months, the same tone that had convinced her to sign documents she didn't fully understand, the same tone he had once used on me. But now, I heard something else beneath it. Urgency, fear, because he knew he was running out of time. He moved closer to her chair. You remember what we discussed, he continued quietly. Everything is secure. Melissa didn't respond. That silence was new, and Daniel noticed. His jaw tightened slightly. Then he shifted tactics. His eyes moved back to me. If she signs, that he said calmly, the evidence against you gets released immediately. He tapped the folder on the table. That offshore account record will go to federal investigators within minutes. Nathaniel stepped forward slightly. You know that document won't hold up under forensic review. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe not. He paused. But investigations take time. His gaze locked onto me. And during that time, she becomes the prime suspect. The room went still. Because he wasn't threatening just me anymore. He was threatening Melissa. Her shoulders trembled. He leaned closer to her. Do you really think she's protecting you? He asked softly. His words were surgical, precise, designed to create doubt. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but she still didn't speak. That silence was something Daniel hadn't expected, and it unsettled him. He straightened slightly. Then his voice hardened. Without this sale, he said, the company collapses. Investors pull out. Contracts freeze. He looked at me again. You'll destroy everything you built. That sentence hung in the air, because it was the same argument he had likely repeated to himself. The same justification. He wasn't stealing. He was saving the company. People like Daniel always believed their betrayal was necessary. I leaned back slowly. Then I asked him one simple question. Why did you create Meridian Strategic Holdings before you started the transfers? His eyes flickered. Just once. But enough. That tiny reaction told me everything. He hadn't expected me to know that detail. And when people are surprised, they reveal truths they can't hide. He recovered quickly. It's a standard investment vehicle. Nathaniel spoke calmly. For shell vendors. Daniel ignored him. Instead, he looked directly at Melissa. Sign the closing documents, he said quietly. Everything ends today. Melissa's breathing became uneven. Her gaze moved between us, between two futures. One built on lies, one built on consequences. Her fingers tightened around the pen. Daniel saw it, and for the first time, his voice lost its softness. Don't make a mistake you can't undo. The threat was no longer subtle. It was clear, direct, cold. I didn't interrupt, because this decision had to be hers, completely hers. If she signed under pressure, it wouldn't hold legally. But if she chose freely, it would change everything. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. 4:57 p.m. 63 minutes left. Nathaniel's tablet vibrated quietly. A notification. He glanced at it, then looked at me. His expression shifted slightly. Something new, something serious. I knew what that meant. There was another development, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Because this moment still belonged to Melissa. Daniel leaned closer. His voice lowered. If you don't sign, you lose everything. He paused, then added quietly, and she won't be able to save you. Melissa closed her eyes. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then she whispered something so softly that only the three of us closest to her could hear. You never loved me. Daniel froze. That sentence hit him harder than any accusation, because it exposed the truth he couldn't deny. He didn't answer, and his silence became confirmation. Melissa opened her eyes. They were no longer filled with confusion. They were clear, steady, resolved. She placed the pen on the table, then slowly reached for the withdrawal form instead of the closing documents. Daniel's voice snapped. Melissa. But she didn't look at him. She signed her name. One smooth motion. No hesitation. No tremor. The sound of the pen lifting off the paper felt louder than anything else in the room. Because with that single signature, the sale of Carter Analytics had just been legally frozen. Nathaniel immediately tapped his tablet. Compliance suspension triggered, he said calmly. Daniel's face went completely still. For a moment, he didn't react. Then something in his eyes changed. Not anger, not panic, something colder, more dangerous. He reached into his suit jacket slowly and pulled out his phone. Then he said one sentence that made the air feel suddenly heavy. You just made this very public. Because on his screen was the event live stream dashboard for the company anniversary banquet. Already active, already connected to every major investor attending that night. and the title he had typed into the broadcast window read, Emergency Disclosure, CEO Financial Misconduct. Epchong 9. Chapter 9. At 5:03 p.m., exactly 57 minutes before the closing deadline, my husband pressed a single button on his phone, and the live stream for our company's 10th anniversary banquet switched from the welcome slideshow to a title screen that read, Emergency Disclosure CEO Financial Misconduct. The audience count in the corner climbed rapidly. 47 viewers, all investors, board members, and senior clients, already logged into the private broadcast. Before we go further, let me ask you something. If someone tried to destroy your reputation in front of hundreds of people before you even had a chance to speak, would you try to stop them? Or would you let them expose themselves first? Because in that moment, Daniel believed he had just won, but he didn't realize something critical. He had just made his biggest mistake. If you believe the truth is most powerful when revealed publicly, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments if you think public exposure is the ultimate form of karma. Daniel held the phone calmly in his hand. His expression was composed again, controlled, calculated. I warned you, he said quietly. The live stream timer ticked at the bottom of the screen. Recording active, audio enabled. He looked directly at me. Once this goes live, he continued, investors will freeze their confidence in you immediately. He paused, and regulators will have reason to investigate. He tapped the folder on the table again. That offshore account record will be the first thing they see. Melissa's face went pale. Daniel, you said you wouldn't. He cut her off with a cold glance. You forced this. His tone had changed completely now. No warmth, no softness, only control. Because in his mind, this was no longer personal. It was strategic. I watched him quietly. Then I asked the one question he hadn't expected. Do you really want investigators looking at our financial records tonight? His eyes narrowed slightly. Only yours. That answer told me everything. He still believed the fake evidence would protect him. He still believed he controlled the narrative. Nathaniel stepped forward, calmly. You've already triggered regulatory exposure, he said. Daniel didn't react, because he didn't understand yet. Not fully, Nathaniel continued. When a CEO misconduct claim is broadcast to investors, it automatically activates compliance audit protocols. Daniel's expression flickered, just slightly. What are you talking about? He asked. Nathaniel met his gaze evenly. Full financial transparency review. He paused. Of the entire company, the room went very still, because now Daniel realized something. He hadn't just targeted me, he had triggered scrutiny on everything. Every account, every transaction, every transfer, including the $6.4 million he thought was hidden. Daniel's jaw tightened. That review takes weeks, he said. Nathaniel shook his head. Not when a sale transaction is pending. He held up his tablet. Regulatory lock can be applied within minutes. That was the moment Daniel truly understood. His attempt to frame me publicly had just exposed himself publicly. His gaze shifted rapidly between us. For the first time, he looked uncertain, but he recovered quickly, because Daniel always had a backup plan. He raised his phone slightly. The broadcast is already running, he said quietly. And once investors see this document, I interrupted him, then they'll ask why the routing code format didn't exist 2 years ago. His hand froze. His eyes locked onto mine. And in that moment, I saw it. Real fear, because he hadn't realized that flaw. Not until now. Silence filled the room. Then Melissa spoke, her voice shaking, but clear. You told me she stole money. Daniel didn't look at her. You don't understand. No, she said louder now. You lied. That single word carried more weight than any evidence, because now his own accomplice was turning against him. Daniel's composure cracked, just slightly, but enough. You signed the transfers too, he snapped. The room went cold, because he had just done something irreversible. He had shifted from denial to blame. Exactly the progression people follow when their control begins collapsing. Melissa stared at him in shock. You said they were vendor payments. He didn't respond, and that silence became another confirmation. I spoke quietly. You used her as your authorization shield. Daniel's eyes snapped back to me. This isn't about her, he said sharply. It's about you. There it was. The next stage. Victim narrative. You were reckless, he continued. You would have destroyed the company. He stepped closer. I saved it. That sentence hung heavily in the air because he truly believed it. People like Daniel always do. They rewrite reality to justify their betrayal. Nathaniel's tablet vibrated again. He checked it, then spoke calmly. Compliance suspension officially registered. He looked at Daniel. Sale transaction is now frozen. Daniel's grip tightened around his phone. No, he said quietly. Yes, Nathaniel replied. The shares tied to the unresolved loan cannot be used in the sale. Daniel's breathing became shallow because now the truth was unavoidable. He had lost his majority control, and without majority control, he couldn't complete the transfer. The live stream counter climbed higher. 189 viewers, then 213. Investors were already watching, waiting, expecting an explanation. Daniel stared at the screen, then slowly lowered his phone. His voice was quieter now, more dangerous. You think this ends here? I met his gaze calmly. No, I paused. This is where it begins. Because he still didn't know the most critical part. He still didn't know Nathaniel had been documenting everything. For 11 months, he still didn't know the compliance audit file already contained full transaction trails. And he definitely didn't know that the moment he initiated that public misconduct broadcast, he had automatically triggered a mandatory external forensic review. A review that no one inside the company could control. Nathaniel's tablet chimed again. He looked at it, then said quietly, the external auditors just accepted the emergency review request. Daniel's face went completely still, because now he understood. The investigation wasn't coming in weeks. It was starting tonight. And once external auditors stepped in, the truth would no longer be something he could hide, or spin, or control. At 6:12 p.m., exactly 12 minutes after the company anniversary banquet officially began, my husband walked onto the ballroom stage, holding a microphone in one hand and a printed copy of the fake offshore transfer in the other, while 247 investors, clients, and city officials sat watching in complete silence. Behind him, the giant screen displayed the words, Emergency Disclosure. The amount listed in bold beneath it was $980,000. Before I continue, let me ask you something. If someone tried to humiliate you, publicly using lies, would you rush to defend yourself? Or would you let them dig their own grave first? Because what happened in that ballroom wasn't just exposure. It was a collapse. And it happened exactly the way people like Daniel always fall. Publicly, irreversibly. If you believe karma works best, when everyone is watching, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments if you think public betrayal deserves public consequences. The ballroom lights felt almost too bright. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished glass tables. Waiters stood frozen at the edges of the room, unsure whether to continue serving drinks. Daniel stood center stage, perfectly composed, his posture straight, his voice steady, as if he were delivering a routine quarterly update. Ladies and gentlemen, he began calmly, I regret to inform you that we have uncovered serious financial misconduct involving our former CEO. The word former echoed slightly through the microphone. It was deliberate, calculated. He wanted the audience to understand that I no longer had authority, that I was already removed. A murmur moved through the crowd. I stood near the back of the room with Nathaniel and Melissa. Neither of them spoke, because we both knew something Daniel didn't. This wasn't his stage anymore. He just hadn't realized it yet. Daniel lifted the document slightly. This transfer, he continued, was routed to an offshore account under Evelyn Carter's authorization 2 years ago. The screen behind him switched to a scanned image of the fake document. My name printed clearly at the bottom. Gasps rippled across the room. Several investors leaned forward. Some whispered to each other. Daniel paused, allowing the reaction to build. He always understood timing, emotion, perception, but he didn't understand one crucial thing. Truth leaves patterns, and lies leave flaws. One of the board members stood up. Daniel, he said, cautiously, has this been verified? Daniel nodded confidently. Our internal review confirmed the transaction. That statement was technically true. Internal review, not external, and internal reviews can be manipulated. Nathaniel stepped forward quietly beside me. It's time, he said. I nodded, then began walking toward the stage. My heels sounded louder than usual against the marble floor. Some heads turned, then more. Whispers spread quickly, because everyone in that room knew who I was, and no one expected me to walk forward calmly. Not after being accused publicly. Daniel saw me approaching. For the first time that evening, his confidence faltered, just slightly, but enough, because he hadn't expected me to appear. He thought I would stay silent, disappear, retreat. He didn't understand something fundamental. I never built Carter Analytics by retreating. I stopped at the foot of the stage, then spoke clearly. May I respond? The microphone picked up my voice, even from below. The room fell completely silent. Daniel hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but refusing would look suspicious. So he forced a thin smile. Of course. He handed me the microphone. The moment it touched my hand, everything shifted, because now the narrative was no longer his. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned slightly toward the audience and asked one calm question. Does anyone here know what an invalid routing code looks like? Confusion moved through the room. Investors exchanged glances. Daniel frowned, because that wasn't the defense he expected. I held up the document. This routing format, I continued evenly, was introduced internationally last year. I paused. This transfer supposedly occurred 2 years ago. The silence became heavier. Then, someone near the front whispered, "That's impossible." Daniel's jaw tightened. He stepped closer. "You're trying to create confusion." "No," Nathaniel's voice cut in calmly from below the stage. He stepped forward, holding his tablet high enough for the front rows to see. "This is confirmation from an external banking compliance database." He turned the screen toward the audience. "Routing code, standardization records." Daniel's face went pale, because now his evidence wasn't just being questioned. It was being dismantled publicly. A senior investor stood up. "Daniel," she said sharply, "is this document fabricated?" The word fabricated landed heavily. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again, because he didn't have a response ready for this direction. He had prepared to accuse, not to defend. Melissa stepped forward next. Her voice trembled at first, but then steadied. "He told me to sign vendor authorizations," she said. Every head in the room turned toward her. She continued, "I didn't know the payments were being routed to his own company." Shock rippled across the audience, because now this wasn't just a dispute. It was testimony, public testimony. Daniel's composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. The microphone picked up the sharpness in his voice. "I built this company with her." That was his next stage. Victim narrative, blame shifting. He pointed toward me. She became reckless. I protected our investors, but the audience no longer looked convinced, because now doubts had taken root. And once doubt appears publicly, control disappears. Nathaniel stepped forward one last time, his voice calm, precise. External forensic auditors began reviewing company financials 20 minutes ago. He paused. They've already flagged $6.4 million in suspicious transfers. The room went completely silent. Daniel froze, because now his final illusion had shattered. This was no longer a narrative battle. It was a legal one, and he had just walked himself directly into it. Under bright lights, in front of witnesses, with a microphone in his hand, and nowhere left to hide. At 6:41 p.m., exactly 29 minutes after the external auditors officially confirmed suspicious transfers, totaling $6.4 million. Two uniformed federal investigators walked through the ballroom doors while my husband was still standing on stage, holding a microphone he no longer had the strength to speak into. The room count on the live stream had climbed to 412 viewers. Every investor, every senior client, and now every employee watching from their phones. Before I continue, let me ask you something. If the person who tried to destroy you was forced to face consequences in front of everyone they once controlled, would you feel satisfaction or just quiet relief? Because what happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was something far more devastating. It was final. If you believe real karma doesn't need shouting, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments whether you think public accountability is the only kind that truly matters. The ballroom had gone completely still. The soft background music had been cut minutes earlier. Only the faint hum of the overhead lights remained. Daniel stood frozen at center stage. For the first time since I had ever known him, he looked small, not physically, but in presence, because control had left him. And without control, people like Daniel don't know who they are. One of the investigators stepped forward, calmly. Mr. Daniel Carter. His voice was professional, neutral, unemotional. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He stared at the investigator, as if trying to process a reality he had never imagined facing. Then finally, he nodded once. Yes, the investigator continued. We need to speak with you regarding financial irregularities connected to Meridian Strategic Holdings. The name echoed across the silent room. Several investors gasped quietly, because now the truth was no longer speculation. It was official, documented, recognized by authorities. Daniel's voice finally returned. This is a misunderstanding, he said quickly. There it was. Stage 1, denial. He stepped forward slightly. You can't base accusations on incomplete internal data. The second investigator spoke calmly. This is based on external audit findings. He paused. And confirmed transaction trails. Daniel's hands tightened around the microphone. His knuckles turned white. That money was reinvested for strategic growth, he insisted. Stage 2, justification, blame shifting. I was protecting the company, he added, his voice rising slightly. He pointed toward me. She would have driven it into the ground. That accusation hung in the air. But it landed differently now, because no one in their room believed him anymore. Investors avoided his gaze. Board members whispered quietly among themselves. The narrative he once controlled had collapsed completely. The first investigator spoke again. You're also under review for possible falsification of financial records. Daniel froze, because that was the charge he hadn't expected to surface so quickly. The fake offshore transfer, the forged authorization chains. His contingency plan now turned into evidence against him. Melissa stepped forward, slowly beside me. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. He created documents to frame her. Every head turned again. Daniel's face went pale. Melissa, he said quietly, don't do this. There it was. Stage 3, victim positioning. His voice softened. Desperate now. You don't understand what they'll do to you. But Melissa didn't look at him, because she finally understood something she hadn't before. He wasn't trying to protect her. He was trying to silence her. She swallowed. Then said the sentence that ended everything. I've already given them access to my records. The words landed like a final blow. Because that meant investigators didn't just have external evidence. They had insider cooperation. And insider testimony destroys defenses faster than anything else. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal the truth. He knew it was over. The investigator spoke calmly. Mr. Carter, we're requesting that you come with us to discuss these matters. Not an arrest, not yet, but a formal detainment for questioning. Public, visible, irreversible. Daniel didn't move. He stood there for several seconds. Then his gaze shifted slowly toward me. And in that moment, for the first time, I saw something I had never seen in his eyes before. Not anger, not arrogance, not control. Fear, quiet, deep, real. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. His voice lowered, almost a whisper. You could have stopped this. I met his gaze calmly. No, I said softly. You could have. That was the truth. Because everything that happened tonight had begun long before this moment. It began with choices, with decisions, with betrayals made quietly. Over months, over years, the investigators gently guided him off the stage. No handcuffs, no struggle, just the quiet end of control. As he walked past the tables, no one spoke, no one reached out, no one defended him. Because once truth becomes visible, loyalty disappears quickly. The ballroom doors closed behind him, and the silence that followed felt different now. Not tense, not uncertain, but heavy, final. One of the senior investors approached me slowly. His voice was careful. What happens to the company now? It was the question everyone was thinking. I answered calmly. The board will appoint interim leadership until the audit concludes. He nodded slowly, then said something unexpected. You built this company, he said quietly. We should have trusted you. I didn't respond, because validation after betrayal doesn't erase what happened. It simply confirms what was already true. Melissa stood beside me silently, tears still on her face, but her posture looked different now. Not frightened, not trapped, just exhausted. Nathaniel approached quietly. It's over, he said. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. Because while Daniel's fall had begun publicly tonight, the true ending would come in the quiet aftermath, where consequences settle slowly and life continues without the people who once tried to control it. 3 months later, on a quiet Tuesday morning at exactly 9:06 a.m., I sat alone in a small conference room overlooking the Austin skyline and signed a final settlement document transferring $18.6 million in recovered assets back into Carter Analytics' operational accounts. The number printed at the bottom of the page was simple. Restitution confirmed $6,417,223. Before I tell you what happened after everything ended, let me ask you something. When the people who hurt you finally face consequences, does it really feel like victory? Or just the quiet closing of a chapter you never wanted to live through in the first place? Because the truth is, revenge didn't feel the way I once imagined. It didn't feel loud. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt still. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after someone tried to take everything from you, go ahead and like this video and tell me in the comments what helped you heal the most. The investigation had moved quickly after that night, much faster than anyone expected. Because once external auditors confirmed the transaction, Trail's federal authorities had no reason to delay. Daniel Carter had been formally charged with financial fraud, falsification of records, and corporate embezzlement. Not because I accused him, not because Melissa testified, but because the evidence was overwhelming. Transaction logs, biometric authorizations, shell company registrations tied directly to his identity, and the falsified offshore document he had tried to use against me. That last one had sealed his fate, because forging financial records to frame someone else doesn't just prove guilt, it proves intent. And intent is what turns financial misconduct into a criminal case. He had tried to control everything, but he had underestimated one simple truth. Digital systems remember everything. Melissa's outcome had been different. Not easy, not painless, but different. Her cooperation with investigators had been immediate and complete. She provided access to her communications financial records and internal authorizations. She admitted what she had done. She admitted what she hadn't understood. And in the end, prosecutors classified her as a cooperating witness rather than a primary defendant. She lost her shares. She lost her position. She lost her reputation in the industry. But she didn't lose her freedom. The last time I saw her was in the hallway outside a deposition room 2 months ago. She didn't try to apologize. She didn't try to explain. She simply said one sentence quietly. I should have known the difference between being trusted and being used. I nodded once, because that sentence was something we both understood now. Trust is not measured by how someone makes you feel. It's measured by how they act when no one is watching. Nathaniel remained at Carter Analytics. The board unanimously voted to retain him as Chief Compliance Officer, not because he exposed Daniel, but because he had done something far more difficult. He had stayed silent long enough to build an airtight case. Patience is rarely celebrated, but it is often what prevents injustice from surviving. As for the company, it survived. Not perfectly, not without scars. Several investors withdrew during the investigation. Some clients paused contracts, but the core remained intact because the truth had come out before the damage became irreversible. And 6 weeks after everything ended, the board offered me my position back. Chief Executive Officer. Full voting control restored. No conditions, no negotiations. I accepted, not because I wanted power, but because I wanted closure. Because walking away would have meant letting Daniel's betrayal define the final chapter of something I had built with my own hands. And I refused to give him that. Now, every morning when I walk into the office, the building feels quieter than it used to. Not empty, just calmer. No hidden tensions, no unspoken manipulation. Just work. Real work. The kind that built Carter Analytics in the first place. There's one thing I keep on my desk now. A single printed clause from our original corporate charter. The minority shareholder protection rule. The one that required a 15% veto threshold. The rule Daniel once called unnecessary. The rule that ultimately saved everything. It's not there as a reminder of him. It's there as a reminder of something much more important. Preparation is not paranoia. It is self-respect. Because people who plan to betray you rarely announce it. They move quietly. They wait patiently. And they rely on one thing above all else. Your assumption that they never would. I never made that assumption again. 6 months after the investigation ended, I filed for divorce. There was no confrontation, no arguments. No final conversation, just paperwork. Clean, quiet, final. Sometimes the most powerful boundary you can set is simply choosing not to engage anymore. Last winter, on the anniversary of that night, I returned to the Driscoll Hotel ballroom. Not for a celebration, not for a speech, just to stand quietly in the same space where everything had fallen apart. The chandeliers still reflected the same warm light. The marble floor still echoed softly under footsteps. Nothing about the room had changed, but everything about me had. Because revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about reclaiming yourself. And that night, I realized something I hadn't understood before. Daniel hadn't really tried to take my company. He had tried to take my identity, my confidence, my belief in my own judgment. And in the end, that was the one thing he never managed to steal. Before I end this story, I want to ask you one last question. If you were in my place, after everything that happened, would you have chosen to fight for what was yours, or walk away and start over somewhere new? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reminded you that quiet strength is often the most powerful kind, don't forget to subscribe. Because next time, I'll tell you about the night a mother tried to erase her daughter from a family inheritance and discovered too late that the daughter had been keeping records for 20 years.